The wind had a voice out here, and Silas Boone had learned long ago to listen to things that didn't speak with tongues. His horse, a patient buckskin mare named Mercy, came to a halt beneath the bleached sign that once read Ridge Hollow. Now only the word hollow remained. The rest had been stripped away by time. Like everything else, he dismounted slow, favoring his right leg. The old cavalry injury still burned on cold mornings, and this one was colder than most, though. The sun was high. Dust coated the wooden rails, the porch slats, and the cracked windows like forgotten breath. The ranch had been sold to him for $1, a government deed tied to things no one spoke of anymore. Silas hadn't come looking for fortune, only silence, maybe forgiveness, though he wasn't sure who from. The barn leaned like it wanted to give up. The chimney sagged sideways, missing 3 bricks near the top. He unslung his rifle from his saddlebag and moved forward with the caution of a man who'd seen too many backfires in life to ever trust the quiet. The front door gave under the weight of his hand, moaning on its rusted hinge. The smell inside wasn't death or rot, just damp wood and burnt coffee. There were boot scuffs on the floor. A shawl hung on the back of a rocking chair that rocked gently, though the air was still. Then she appeared. Small frame, dirt on her hem, wild braids that hadn't seen a comb in days, maybe weeks. She didn't scream or cower, just stood near the hearth, eyes alert, body ready to vanish if needed. Her hands were empty, but she looked like someone who could disappear into her own shadow if pressed. Silas didn't lower the rifle, not at first. "You living here?" She nodded once. The silence stretched. "I bought this land." "Papers signed." Another nod. She didn't move. Only then did he notice the tin cup on the table. Half full, steam long gone. Someone had just been sitting here. Someone still was. "I'll stay in the barn," he said quietly, finally lowering the rifle. "Don't aim to take nothing from you. Not tonight." She didn't reply, and he didn't expect her to. The sun dropped fast behind the ridge. By the time Silas laid his blanket in the loft above the mule stall, the cold had crept into his bones like regret. He lay there listening, for movement, for breath, for danger, but none came. Only the wind rattling the broken gate, and the creak of that same rocking chair as if someone were still in in the dark. He thought of names. He hadn't asked hers. He hadn't offered his. That seemed like a kindness. Names made people stay longer than they ought to. Morning came gray and dry. He boiled water on a rusted stove beside the barn and drank coffee from a tin cup that burned his lips. The house remained closed, curtain drawn. He didn't push. Just walked the perimeter, checked the fence lines, knocked dust from the porch. Boards with the toe of his boot. In town, they told him she was called Lenna, that she'd been there since her kin vanished. Father, maybe a husband too. Some said she was married once. Some said worse things, things said too easily about women who lived without men. "She was left," the storekeeper muttered. "That's all we know." "By who?" Silas asked. The man only shook his head and gave him a sack of flour. "Back at the ranch, she was mending something on the porch, a quilt, maybe, her fingers moving like habit, not hope." Her eyes never left him, not even as he tied Mercy to the post and set the flour by the door. "You don't need to fix anything," she said, her voice brittle like the frost on an empty window pane. "Didn't plan on fixing," he replied. "Just staying." She looked away. "Then stay where the rot won't swallow you." That night he sat outside the barn, watching the stars appear one by one like forgotten prayers. He didn't pray anymore, but he did listen. To the wind, to the branches creaking under no weight at all, and to the faint sound of a rocking chair, moving just beyond the door of a house he hadn't entered again. Inside, the coffee kettle sat cold. The shawl still hung, but something about the way the rocking chair moved, as if stirred by memory, not wind, made him feel like the ranch was not as empty as it first appeared, and neither was he. The days unfolded like dry pages of a book left too long in the sun. Silas rose before light, his boots thudding heavy on the porch boards as he made his way toward the woodpile. Lenna was already awake most mornings, her silhouette visible through the thin curtain, stirring a pot, feeding the chickens, moving like someone who had learned to survive by becoming invisible. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in nods or gestures. He fixed the back gate. She left a basket of eggs by the barn door without a word. Their silences were not uncomfortable, just practiced. Two people living side by side. carrying too much history to make room for small talk. In the evenings, Silas smoked on the edge of the corral, watching the shadows stretch over the dust. He noticed the way she always walked barefoot at dusk, a lantern in her hand, stepping carefully toward the large willow tree that stood like a sentinel behind the house. She never lingered, never knelt. Just stood there for a moment, quiet, head bowed, then turned back inside. He never asked why. He figured the tree remembered things better left unsaid. One morning, up in the barn rafters while securing a leaky patch, Silas found something strange. Wrapped in oilcloth and shoved behind a beam, a white dress, yellowed and brittle. Lace fraying at the sleeves, the hem dirt-stained and stiff. A wedding dress. He touched it with the back of his knuckles, as if it might burn. The fabric crumbled, slightly under his hand, like it had been worn only once and then forgotten on purpose. Next to it, wedged behind an old wooden crate, was a biscuit tin, rusted along the seams, dinted at the top. He opened it slow, the metal squealing. Inside was a photograph, blurred and faded, but still whole. A younger Lenna, maybe 17, maybe younger, smiling with her hair braided in a neat crown. Beside her stood a man in cavalry blues, one hand on her shoulder, the other on his belt. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Silas stared at the photo a long time. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe some clue to explain the way Lenna flinched at thunder or why she never sat in the rocking chair anymore. That night, after supper, he dropped the photograph into the stove ash and watched the edges curl black. Later that week, while hauling salt and nails into town, Silas asked the general store owner offhandedly, "You know her people? The girl up at Ridge Hollow?" The man scratched at his whiskers. "Her daddy, Luther, used to come through here every Sunday. Big man, loud voice, mean to the bone. And her husband?" The storekeeper hesitated, glanced around the empty room. "Young fella. Married her too fast. Some say it wasn't her choice. Luther didn't care either way. One day the husband just disappeared. Then we heard the sheriff arrested Luther for murder. Shot the boy dead. Claimed it was over a card game, but everyone knew better." Silas said nothing. Just set the sack of nails down, paid in coins, and left without another word. That night, the wind picked up. It hissed through the chimney and made the shutters tremble. Silas found himself outside, watching the willow again. The lantern flickered. Beneath it, Lenna stood alone, her hair loose, caught by the breeze like smoke. She didn't notice him, or maybe she did and didn't care. On the porch, forgotten beneath the swing, lay a small porcelain doll. Its dress was torn, one eye missing. Silas picked it up, turned it over in his palm, then placed it gently on the railing before going inside. Later, as he lay on the hay mattress in the barn, he thought about ghosts. Not the kind that rattled chains, but the ones that lived in dresses left to rot in rafters, in names not spoken aloud, in daughters who kept rocking chairs empty on purpose. And sometime just before sleep took him, he heard it. Not loud, not desperate, but enough. The sound of someone crying, only once. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind came low and mean across the prairie. Silas smelled the storm before he saw it. That scent of charged air and distant water that only men who'd slept outside enough times could recognize. He was gathering the chickens when the first crack of thunder split the horizon. The hens scattered like leaves in a gale. Mercy stamped and neighed from the corral, ears twitching by the time he shut the barn doors. The sky had opened up. Rain slapped the tin roof in heavy, vengeful sheets. He jogged back to the house, limping, harder than usual, boots splashing in puddles that hadn't existed an hour before. Inside, the hearth was dark, the air cold. He called her name once, not loud, and got nothing but silence. The door to her room was open. Empty. He found her under the floorboards. The crawlspace hatch in the pantry creaked when he lifted it. A weak beam of lantern light revealed her crouched there, hands over her ears, dress muddied at the knees, hair stuck to her face. Her eyes weren't wide with fear. They were hollow, like she'd gone somewhere far and hadn't quite come back. He didn't say a word, just reached down, and when she didn't resist, he pulled her gently up, sat her near the stove, lit a match, coaxed flame into the cold belly of the cast iron. The wood hissed, catching slow. He poured coffee from the kettle, added a drop of whiskey. She held the mug with both hands, staring into it like it held answers. They sat in silence as the storm howled around them. Hours passed. Then came the knock. Not a timid one, hard. Fist against wood, 3 deliberate pounds. The kind of knock that came from someone who expected the door to open. Silas stood. His rifle leaned against the wall, untouched. Instead, he reached for his hat, placed it slow over his head, and walked to the door. He opened it just wide enough to see the man on the other side. Drenched. Leather duster stuck to his frame. A wide-brimmed hat tilted down to hide most of his face, but not enough. Silas saw the eyes. Too confident. Too sure he'd be welcomed. Evening, the man said. His voice was all mud and rust. Looking for someone. Girl lived here once. Long brown hair. Wild little thing. Silas didn't answer. Her name was Lenna, the man added, pushing his hat back just enough to reveal a jaw lined with scruff. She still around? Rain poured off the edge of Silas's hat brim. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood there in the doorframe, filling it entirely, like a gate that wouldn't swing open again. Behind him, the fire cracked. The girl sat still, her shadow flickering on the wall. The man's smile faltered. She mine. Silas closed the door, just like that. No slam. No shout. Just a quiet end to the question. The wind screamed louder than either of them could. That night, the rocking chair didn't move. The willow stood still. She sat beside the fire long after the embers dimmed. Her bare feet curled beneath her shawl, face unreadable in the half-light. Then her voice, soft as the rain that now whispered instead of shouted. He said he'd come back. Silas didn't look at her, just added another log to the fire. He won't, he said, and meant it. The morning broke clean and too bright, as if the storm had scrubbed the whole sky raw. The air still smelled of wet soil and snapped branches. Puddles shimmered in the low spots, and the willow dripped slow tears into the grass. Silas was up. Before the sun finished rising, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. He walked the fence line, marking posts with his boot where they'd splintered. The barn's southern beam had shifted again, the old place breathing sideways after every storm. He braced it with a plank, drove nails into knots with deliberate force. Each strike felt like punctuation. Lenna trailed him quietly, a coil of wire slung over one shoulder, leather gloves too big for her hands. She didn't ask what needed doing. She just did. When he reached the back gate, he found the latch broken clean off. He held the rusted piece in his palm, turning it, frowning. You shouldn't have ignored that last week, Lenna said, setting down the coil. Silas looked up. It held fine until the wind got inside it. It's not just wind. It's rot. And you knew it. Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried something sharp. He didn't like the shape of it. I bought this place with my eyes open, he muttered. She stepped closer. And you thought buying it meant it wouldn't fall apart? Silas straightened. What do you want me to say? Nothing, she said, voice cracking. I've had enough of men who say everything and mean nothing. He paused, wiped his brow with a sleeve stiff from sweat and sawdust. You stayed, he said finally. After what he did. After your father. You stayed. I wasn't waiting for him, she said, low, as if the words hurt. I was waiting to feel anything. Silas looked at her then, really looked. Her jaw set like a scar, her hands dirty from the earth. And beneath it, a tremble she couldn't hide. They didn't speak again that day. Just worked. The sun climbed, high and mean, drying the grass into gold, dragging their shadows long behind them. That evening, after supper, Silas sat where he always did. On the porch, pipe unlit in his hand, the chair beneath him groaning like an old mule. The wind had calmed to a whisper. Brushing the willow and soft sighs, he heard her footsteps before he saw her. She brought the rocking chair from inside, placed it beside his stool without looking at him. Not too close, not far either. Then she disappeared inside, came back with a blanket, and laid it over his lap. Wordless that he didn't move, didn't thank her. Just sat there with the blanket warming his knees and his chest tightening in ways he hadn't prepared for. She eased down beside him, pulled her braid over one shoulder, and looked out at the fading light for a long while. Neither said anything. Then she whispered, I buried the doll by the willow. Didn't want it watching anymore. Silas nodded once. Some things are meant to be laid down. Between them, the coffee pot steamed gently on the floorboards. Catching the last of the sun, he poured her a cup, then one for himself. And for the first time since he'd arrived, they drank it together. The first frost came like a quiet warning. silvery breath on the window pane, brittle grass crunching beneath boots. The chicken stopped laying. The creek near the edge of the property stiffened to ice at the edges. Even Mercy, that stubborn mule, moved slower in the mornings. Silas brought in more firewood than usual. He repaired the roof with tar scraps and stitched the holes in his coat with thread too thin for the job. Lenna patched the chimney draft with wet newspaper and flour paste, humming softly under her breath as she worked. It wasn't a song he knew, but he didn't interrupt. At night, the wind sang through the eaves like an old widow, long, low, tired. They spent more evenings by the hearth now, sometimes silent, sometimes not. He taught her how to aim steady, how to hold her breath before squeezing the trigger. She wasn't afraid of the rifle, only of the sound it made. She showed him how to braid rope the way her grandfather had, for strength, not beauty. There. Fingers brushed once over a coil. Neither spoke of it. One night, she laughed. Just once. Something about the way Silas cursed under his breath when he dropped a tin plate into the stew pot. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like a surprised puff of air that carried the shape of joy. They both froze. Then, quietly, she stirred the fire. That same night, she drifted asleep in the rocker, her head tilted toward the flame, hair unbraided and tumbling like a curtain of soft earth. Her face, always so guarded, had gone loose. No mask, no armor. Silas stood over her for a moment, holding the old wedding dress in his hands. He didn't think, just draped it gently over her shoulders like a quilt. It smelled of dust and cedar and something older than grief. She didn't stir, didn't flinch, just breathed. He sat back, down. The fire snapped low and gold. Later, she woke without startling, blinked at the embers, at the fabric wrapped around her. "You shouldn't be alone," she murmured, voice still thick with sleep. Silas didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, warmed his hands over the flame. "Then don't go," he said, without looking at her. The room went still again. But the silence was different now. Less like distance, more like shelter. She didn't move back to her room, just pulled the dress tighter and sat beside him. Not touching, but near enough that their breath found the same rhythm. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and slow as forgiveness. Inside, the fire burned on. Steady, low, enough. The sky held a strange stillness that morning, as if even the wind had paused to see what might happen. The snow had melted once, then refrozen overnight, leaving the earth sharp-edged and slick. Silas sat on the porch with a mug between his hands, steam curling into the quiet air. The mule brayed once, uneasy. He knew before he saw them. Two horses approached, not at a gallop, but with the slow, confident tread of men who believed they were owed something. One wore a badge on his chest, dulled by dust. The other wore that same familiar hat, brim low, chin up. Lenna stood at the threshold, coat buttoned, braid over one shoulder. She didn't flinch. Her voice was even when she spoke. "You brought a badge this time." The man slid off his horse, smirk curling under his mustache. "Just following the law, sweetheart. Got a deed says I'm entitled to her." She ran, didn't file nothing legal. "Ain't my fault she got cozy with a crippled squatter." Silas rose. He didn't need the rifle. His presence was enough. Broad-shouldered, steady, one boot planted firm, the other slow but unshaken. "She's not yours," he said. "I got proof she was." "You got proof she was afraid," Silas said. "That's not the same." The deputy cleared his throat, eyes darting between them. "I'm just here to see the paper trail." Silas pulled the folded deed from his coat. Yellowed but real. Signed, stamped, government issued. "Land's mine. House is mine. Everything on it belongs to me or stays by choice." Lenna stepped forward, chin high, voice low but slicing through the cold like an arrow. "I was never yours. Not even when you thought I was." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at the badge beside him, but the deputy didn't move. "Looks like the matter's settled," the lawman said, turning his horse. "No crime here." The man stared for a long moment, eyes full of unfinished threats. But he left. This time, he didn't look back. By dusk, the air had softened again. Lenna hung the old wedding dress on the clothesline, not to wear, just to let it breathe. It danced a little in the breeze, as if shedding the years of dust and silence. Silas watched her from the porch. She turned once, and their eyes met, not with longing, but with something quieter, truer. He hammered an old horseshoe above the door, nailed it firm. For luck. For permanence. That night, they didn't speak much. Didn't need to. She stirred stew in the pot. He fixed the drawer that stuck. Come morning, they saddled both horses. Side by side. The road to town was long, but familiar. Fields to their left lay fallow, snow trimming the edges like lace. To the right, the trees held frost like memory. They didn't touch, but they rode close enough their knees nearly brushed. When they reached the ridge that overlooked the valley, Lenna paused. Look back. That house, she said softly, still doesn't feel like mine. Silas looked over his shoulder, then forward again. Then we make it yours. She nodded once, braid dancing in the wind. And together, they rode on. Not as strangers, not as what they were, but something slow-growing and chosen, like a tree rising from cracked earth, finally finding the sun.